represents Lewis Harris Associates in this matter and who conducted this survey? Mr. Dunn.
Before we begin with the highlights of the report, I'd like to explain how the sample was drawn and how Lewis Harris conducts a poll so that you have some idea of the care and scientific rigor with which we work. The phone calls were made during the first and second week of June, and there were 800 completed interviews made. The process by which we make telephone interviews is called random digit dialing. And what random digit dialing does is it ensures through a computerized process that every person with a telephone, whether or not he is listed in telephone directory, has an equal chance of being in the sample. Because we know that the economically disadvantaged, blacks, Hispanics, and other minority groups have fewer telephones than typically is found in white middle class sections, what we do is weight the results to reflect their distribution in the population. So while we do not have as many blacks or Hispanics in the sample, the results that we have been weighted in order to reflect their distribution in the population. For those of you who have books, we will be following along in the book, and I will be hitting the highlights. After the highlights and after we've talked through the report, I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. First of all, if you will turn to page 4 in the booklet that's been handed out, you'll notice we have overall results. Before I go through those, I should tell you what the objectives of the survey were. The objectives were threefold. The first of the objectives was to survey attitudes toward marijuana legislation by Dade County residents. Second objective was to survey people's attitudes, perceptions, and ideas of what and how serious certain drugs and drug usage were and is in Dade County. And the third was to survey people's awareness and attitudes toward the Coptic Church. So if you'll notice, on section 1, on page 4, those were surveyed overall attitudes toward current legislation. We found, under attitudes toward current legislation, that residents of Dade County are divided on the issue of marijuana possession. While nearly half feel that present penalties are too harsh, 44% favor harsher penalties or retaining the present law. Secondly, generally, people are not in favor of legalizing the sale of marijuana. Nearly 6 in 10 people report that they do not favor the legalization of marijuana, but they do not want to be overly harsh in dealing with those people who use it. Nearly 1 in 3 people report having used marijuana at some time, and only 1 in 10 in this sample currently uses marijuana. If you'll notice in that, we say that that is a figure that is probably very, very conservative, underrepresented, because marijuana is still against the law. So people would be hesitant to report that they are still using. Over 8 in 10 Dade County residents favor the use of marijuana for the treatment of serious illnesses, and would certainly favor further research, medical research, to determine if it has, that is to suggest marijuana, has applications beyond its present limited role. The overall findings in section 2, these were findings with regard to the problems inherent in alcohol use, hard drug and illegal drug use, as well as marijuana use. You'll notice that under point A, people in Dade County feel that alcohol and marijuana are serious problems in today's society. When comparing alcohol and marijuana, residents feel that alcohol is a substantially more dangerous problem. Illegal drugs, as well as over-the-counter drugs or prescription drugs, are viewed as posing substantial health hazards. Expectedly, heroin, barbiturates, and amphetamines are most disapproved of, while marijuana, sleeping pills, and tranquilizers are perceived as posing a less serious problem. In the third section, which we were looking at people's attitudes and awareness of the Coptic Church, Typically, people in Dade County perceive that religious toleration is on the rise, or at least not on the decline in Dade County. That was a question that we wanted to find out in light of the unfortunate incident at Jonestown, which is tending people in America to be somewhat suspicious of unconventional religious groups. However, most people do not favor the federal government granting a legal exemption to religious groups who use marijuana as a sacrament in their services, and we will look at that in some detail in a moment. We find that people are suspicious of unconventional religious groups because a majority feel that such groups should be monitored or closely watched. And again, we feel that this distrust may be due to the unfortunate incidents that happened last year. 8 in 10 people have heard of the Coptic Church, but fewer than 1 in 10 of these people understand the church's stated mission. Almost equal proportions of Dade County residents cite TV news, newspapers as their initial sources of information about the Coptic Church, and a substantial number of the opinion that the media coverage of the Coptic Church and its activities has been unfavorable. Okay, if you will turn to page 7, we'll get into some detail about attitudes toward the possession of marijuana. We found that the residents of Dade County were divided on the issue of marijuana possession, and most have formed an opinion of the appropriateness of the current Florida laws regarding possession. If you'll notice, nearly half, or 47%, find that the present penalties for possession are too harsh, while 23% would like to see heavier penalties for possession. Roughly 1/5, or 21%, of the adults surveyed feel that the present Florida law for possession should remain as it is, and those who are content with the present laws tend to be 35 to 44 years old and people who have not completed high school. People most likely to call for the elimination of all penalties for possession include 25 to 34-year-olds, people with college education, those with household incomes between $75,000 and $15,000, and those people who make $25,000 or over. 23% of the total Dade County residents surveyed would like to see possession of any amount of marijuana possession punished by a jail term. The less lenient attitude toward possession is reflected mainly among residents with household incomes of $7,500 or less, those who did not complete high school, Hispanics, and blacks. Attitudes toward the sale of marijuana. We found that the majority of people think that the sale of marijuana should not be legalized. Nearly 6 in 10, or what 58%, report they would not be in favor, while 35% favor legalizing marijuana sales. Somewhat surprisingly, the youngest people were not the most liberal on this issue, and that surprised us. Rather, over half, 51% of the people, 25 to 34, favor the legalization of marijuana sales, while over half of the liberals and 45% of those making between $75,000 and $15,000 favor the legalization of sales. Now, what we have here is a trend that I want you to begin to watch as we go through the report. What you're seeing is a very up-tempo group. Those people who have attended college at least and intend to be college graduates, those people who are making more than the median income, and those people who consider themselves to be liberals and who tend to be white middle class are printing themselves out as the most lenient in this particular sample. And you will see that trend as we go through the results, and you might want to make notes of that so that you can ask questions with regard to them. Attitudes toward the use of marijuana was a question designed to find out if we should not legalize the sale or the cultivation, but just the use of marijuana. 38% report that it should be legalized, that is the use, while 53% report that they would not favor its legalization. Again, among those most in favor of legalization are those between 25 and 34, the group I just mentioned. Those with incomes between $75,000 and $15,000, 50%, and those who have had some college. And again, expectedly liberals, people who describe themselves as liberals. Those who feel most strongly about not legalizing marijuana are those over 45 years of age, conservatives, those with household incomes of $7,500 or less, Hispanics, and those with some high school education or less. The related question asked people if they favored or opposed easing criminal penalties on people who used marijuana in their homes. Again, you will see a liberalizing effect by these demographic categories that I mentioned. 49%, nearly half, favor easing the criminal penalties. People 34 years of age and under, 60% would like to see that decriminalized for people who use marijuana in their homes. Liberals, people with annual incomes of $25,000 or over, and those with some college. The most opposed, and again, you will find a very conservative element emerging in Dade County, at least in our survey results. Those most opposed to any kind of change, or those people who tend to want harsher penalties, are those with less than a high school education, tend to be poor in terms of economic household income, and again, we find the Hispanic and black community are very conservative. If you will skip down to letter D on page 9, we then began to ask people in a series of questions designed to determine how, if they have ever used marijuana and if they were current users. Overall, 28% of Dade County residents report having used marijuana at some time, while 71% that they have not. Expectedly, those between the ages of 16 and 34 and those with some college education report the largest incidence. People over 45 and those who have not graduated from high school are least likely to have used marijuana. When asked if they were currently users of marijuana, only 11% of the respondents admit that they use it, while 87% report that they did not. Again, we think that the level of reportage at 11% is low, primarily because we were asking people to respond to a question in which they were admitting that they did something that was against the law. So we have no way of knowing how conservative those figures are, but we know that people tend to underreport. The next series of questions was designed to find out if people thought that marijuana should be used in treating illnesses. And the overall finding, as I said in the summary report, is that 8 in 10 people in Dade County favor using marijuana to treat serious illnesses, while over half would favor its use for less serious illnesses. That's 55% reported that they would favor using marijuana for less than glaucoma, less serious than cancer, while 85% of the people in Dade County favor research, that is medical research, to determine if marijuana has potential medical applications beyond its current uses. Again, if we look at subgroups, liberals, 88%, report the largest amount of support for using marijuana to treat nausea caused by chemotherapy and glaucoma. Middle of the roaders and conservatives tend not to be very far behind. 75% of them also would like to see marijuana used for those very serious illnesses. College graduates, 62%, and liberals, 65%, would be in favor of using marijuana to treat less serious illnesses. And again, conservatives at 43%, and those with less than a high school education at 38% were less willing, more conservative in the kinds of applications they would like to see for marijuana. To get at how people felt about marijuana, even if they did not use it themselves, we asked a series of one question and another question that was related to that, if they would turn a son or daughter into the authorities if that son or daughter was found with a supply of marijuana in his or her room. The majority, 65%, report that they would not turn a son or daughter in. Among those least likely to turn a child in are those who had some college, those under 34, and with percentages of nearly 80%. Among those people who reported they would turn in a child to the legal authorities were those people in the age groups of 45 to 64, conservatives, those that made less than $7,500, blacks, and those people who had a high school education or less. So you're getting a feeling of what we have in Dade County, I think, is a very conservative element that tends to be somewhat older, as you might guess. If you will turn to page 23, please. This was the section that dealt with how serious are the abuse and use of various substances. We had 6 questions designed to determine people's attitudes toward the dangers of marijuana, alcohol, and drug use. On page 25, you'll see that under alcohol use, there is rising concern expressed by most people regarding the use of alcohol. This is not just a Dade County phenomenon. We find that over the country, people are reporting significantly larger percentages of concern about alcohol and alcohol abuse as a problem. If you'll notice that 94% of the people, overwhelming percentage, report that alcohol and the drinking and use of alcoholic beverages is a serious problem in America today. And you'll notice that 7 in 10 report that it is a very serious problem. We notice, if you will look down at the last paragraph, people's responses in the 25 to 34 age category, that's that group again that we have been talking about time and time again throughout the survey, report the largest percentages of concern, and this is a time at which people's lives begin to stabilize, their drinking patterns begin to solidify themselves. Under letter B, when asked about marijuana use, 78% report that it is a moderate or serious problem, and of those, 52% believe it is a very serious problem. There are clear differences in opinion based on the demographic categories that we had in this survey. 80% of those people 45 and over say that it is a moderate or very serious problem, while 65% of those under 24 feel the same way. On page 26, you'll notice that 60% of the people who have had less than a high school education think that marijuana problem is very serious, compared with about 45% of those who have attended college or college graduates. Clearly, people with college experience tend to view the problem as less serious, but they still view it as a problem. Comparatively, people were asked which is more serious, the use of alcohol or the use of marijuana. Nearly 4 in 10, 40%, feel that alcohol is more dangerous, while 3 in 10 believe marijuana poses the larger threat. A surprisingly large percentage, 22%, think that they're equally serious, while 13% aren't sure which of the two is the most serious. Again, those who did not graduate but attended college, 52%, felt that alcohol was the most dangerous, while high school and college graduates, 27%, feel more strongly about marijuana. We then asked some questions that had to do with the kinds of drugs that are legal and illegally obtained, not only in Dade County but throughout the country, and we asked them how much of a threat those particular drugs posed. Nearly 8 in 10 believe that typical prescription and non-prescription drugs found on the market that are currently available today pose health hazards, while only 1 in 10 do not perceive potential threats. I think you're seeing a growing awareness in America today, and Dade County is representative of this, of a distrust in just over-the-counter drugs and prescription drugs. People want more and more information and are requiring more and more information about the drugs and medicines that they take. To get a more specific picture of which drugs people felt were the most dangerous, they were asked whether they approve of people using various drugs. Expectedly, 90% disapprove of use of heroin and hallucinogens. 84% disapprove of cocaine, 78% disapprove of barbiturates, 77% disapprove of amphetamines, and 50% disapprove of sleeping pills and tranquilizers. And older people are the most disapproving than any other age groups. Again, people in Dade County, as in the national trends, are finding more and more potential threats in many of the medicines that are currently available today. Okay, the last section, if you will turn to page 34, and then page 35. This were the series of questions that we designed to find out the levels of awareness of the Coptic Church and people's feeling about various issues with which the Coptic Church has dealt with in the past. If you'll notice, the first section dealt with religious toleration. Dade County residents were optimistic in their estimation of the climate of religious toleration, in that 69% report that toleration is either on the rise or about the same in Dade County, while 18% report that it is diminishing. Among those who are the most optimistic are those with college degrees. 31% of them believe that it's on the rise, and those with the lowest level of education are the most pessimistic. 21% of those who did not graduate from high school believe that religious toleration is increasing. When asked how closely unconventional religious groups should be watched, the majority, 53%, indicate they think such groups should either be monitored or closely watched by the authorities. That is a trend that we will begin marking with our regular surveys in the future, I think, because it's an issue that has come to the fore, especially in light of the incidents at Jonestown last year. As expected, younger people, aged 16 to 34, are the most tolerant, and 53% report that religious groups ought to be left alone. 23% of those 65 and older express the belief that such groups should not be watched. As one might expect, older Americans are more conservative and more suspicious of religious groups' motives. Expectedly, conservatives and liberals are sharply divided on the issue. 51% of the liberals believe the religious group should not be monitored, while only 33% of the conservatives feel the same. Blacks and Hispanics were more liberal in this respect than the white middle class in believing that religious groups of an unconventional nature should be left alone. When asked whether the federal government should allow the use of marijuana as a sacrament, as it did with wine during Prohibition, most people overwhelmingly say no. 7 in 10 feel that such an exception should not be made, while only 24% think that it should. Younger people, again, and in that age group that we talked about before, are the most liberal on that issue. And the last section dealt with the Coptic Church specifically. One of the most surprising findings in the study, from our perspective, is that a large percentage of people, 82%, have heard of the Coptic Church. Moreover, the greatest awareness is found in the 45 to 64 age group. We feel that coincides with media use, which is typically heavier as people get older. That is, all media use, television, radio, and the newspapers and print media. This finding is consistent with national figures showing that people over 45 are among the heaviest and most consistent users of media, but a substantial number, 73%, between 16 and 24 know of the Coptic Church. Knowledge of church beliefs is a finding with which we had very consistent and over issues findings with regard to knowledge about what the Coptic Church stands for. We found that most people